Hello, Serious Survivor here. And today we're going to talk about 3 different subjects, and we're going to touch on each one very quickly. The first is a list of large corporations and companies that have already or have begun mandating the vaccination for all employees and future employees. Then we're going to look at which states have enacted legislation that prevents companies or employers from mandating the vaccine. And finally, we're going to look at the religious exemption, and I'll leave a link below to where you can read more on that, but the religious exemption from the vaccination. So let's get started. But one of the important things to remember about the list of companies here is these are very large corporations. And when you deal with a large corporation like this, then we have what's called the trickle-down effect. Basically, when a large corporation creates a mandate of some type, in this case the vax, when they create a mandate, then it's not long before the suppliers that supply that corporation or that company, the workers that work outside of it, because a lot of manufacturers, a lot of manufacturing facilities use temporary workers as a large portion of their workforce through temp services. And this is sometimes 50 to 60 to 70% of their actual workforce. Also, we have to keep in mind the small machine shops, the small companies that supply parts, that supply services to these larger organizations. Now, once these larger organizations fully implement this, then it's only a matter of time before that trickles down and they require any company they do business with, any supplier of theirs, to also require this of their employees. So let's look at the major companies that have already went public stating that this is going to be their policy from here on out. Ascension Health. And they announced they will require vaccines for all of its employees, and a statement directly from them is whether or not they provide direct patient care or whether they work in our sites of care or remotely, they will require the vaccination. Anthem, BlackRock, Cisco, Delta Airlines, DoorDash, Equinox, Facebook, Ford. And Ford is another one of those that we're talking about. It's a really large company, and it's gonna affect much more than just the people that work directly for that company. The United Auto Workers Labor Union said Tuesday it would be reinstating a mask mandate at all of its facilities nationwide. Goldman Sachs, Google, Jefferies. Jefferies is one of those financial giant corporations. Lyft, Microsoft, Morgan Stanley, Netflix, the New York Times, Saks Fifth Avenue, Salesforce, which is a software giant. Basically, they're a large customer service software company. Twitter, Tyson Foods, Uber, Union Square Hospitality Group. And this is another one that's spread out as they own hundreds of restaurants in New York, Washington, D.C., and other areas. They will require vaccinations for staff and guests. United Airlines, Walgreens, the Walt Disney Company, Walmart, and the Washington Post. I realize that's not an all-inclusive list. There are many more companies that are going to be doing this too, and many more may be joining them, and simply have not made the announcement yet. But this will trickle down, and it will trickle down throughout the entire economy. These are the big powerhouses, or some of them. These are the top companies. So when we talk about top companies, they have hundreds of other companies supporting them, and these are your mom and pop businesses. A lot of them, these are your middle class businesses, and these are smaller supply chains, supply warehouses, and things like that, machine shops, and this is going to trickle down to everyone. Next, let's look at the states that have already implemented legislation banning mandatory vaccines required by employers or for potential employees. Because one thing I didn't mention in the list above is that not only is this affecting people that work for the company, but as time goes by, all new hires will have to been fully vaccinated to get a job with any of those companies that we mentioned. So as they weed out the ones they don't want, they only hire in the ones they want. Now, we do have protection against this, and it's not a lot, but we have to use it. And some of this protection comes in the form of our state and local governments, and some of the state and local governments are actually putting legislation into place that mandates or prevents this type of mandate from affecting someone's employment, housing, or basically their way of life. And I'll put a graphic on the screen here. Number 1, Alabama. Senate Bill 267 prohibits local and state government entities from issuing vaccine passports or requiring an individual to receive an immunization as a condition for receiving government benefits or services. The bill also does not allow private businesses to refuse goods or services or deny persons admission because of their immunization status or lack of documentation of immunization. And this is what we're going to see sort of consistent with these states is basically what we're looking at is when they're banning these mandates, what they're doing is putting in place a ban on a vaccine passport type of system that we've heard so much talk about and we see already implemented in some of the states on the map that you see there. It also prevents small businesses from banning people if they have not been vaccinated. Now, I realize that people have a right to do business with who they want, and that's understandable, but that's part of the provision here. And it also prevents the state and governments from pulling people's state benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, things like that. It also prevents companies from forcing vaccinations on their employees as terms of condition of employment. Next is Alaska, and theirs is Administrative Order 321. And most of these are going to be about the same as what we just said, so I'm not going to read all that off for each one of them. Arizona, Executive Order 2021-09. And the order took effect on April 19th, 2021. Arkansas, signed into law, House Bill 1547. Florida, signed into law, Executive Order number 21-81. Georgia, signed into law, Executive Order 05.25.21.01. And it also has pending legislation in the House. Indiana, House Bill 1405, effective July 1st, 2021. Kentucky, and this is Senate Bill number 8. And something to mention briefly also, the states Connecticut and Maine, both of these states repealed legislation that prevent children under the age of 18 from taking the religious exemption for the vaccine. So they basically stripped our children, or the children in that area, of their rights to make that choice. You talk about a 16 or 17-year-old, they're old enough to know if their convictions are true or not, and they're old enough to understand what's going on around them. So this is really disturbing, this kind of trend we're seeing, and we're seeing this trend in more than just those two states also. We need to keep an eye on that. Montana, signed into law, House Bill 334. North Dakota, House Bill 1465, signed into law. Oklahoma, signed into law, Senate Bill 658. Oregon Revised Statute 433.416. South Carolina, signed into law, Executive Order number 2021-23. And multiple other bills and legislation currently there. South Dakota, signed into law, Executive Order 2021-08. Tennessee, signed into law, Senate Bill 187. Texas, signed into law, Executive Order GA35. Utah, signed into law, House Bill 308. And those are the ones that have actually passed legislation now that for terms of employment, for terms of being able to attend school, or for any other terms. They also maintain the religious exemption that we talked about later. I encourage you to read through these, the bill numbers that I read off, read through those and see the exact details. This is just an overview here. Most of them are saying the same things, that you can't stop kids from going to school because they don't have the vaccine. You can't fire your employee because they don't have the vaccine. You can't require that as a term of employment, whether it be future employment or current employment. And you cannot enact, it bans, most of these laws have banned the governments, local and state, from enacting a vaccine passport system. I encourage everyone to look up their state on the chart, read those laws, because it's very important. And it's also important to read the laws on some of it that's already been passed in some areas of the nation, because some areas of the nation are repealing existing rights that we had to refuse vaccinations. What I'm talking about is the religious exemption. This is the one they seem primarily focused on in several different states. And once again, this shows what they're attacking. Now, let's talk a little bit about that religious exemption. I'm going to read a few statements here, and there are links below in the description. Make sure to check those out because those are very important links to what we're talking about here. The question is, can employers really make workers get vaccinated? And the short answer is depends. It depends on where you live. And in certain states, they've prevented this from now. But what we have to look at is when larger corporations are trying to mandate something like this, then there's an end game that's much bigger than just one piece of legislation. So they're not going to hesitate to start moving these companies out of states that have these mandates that are banning the implementation of mandatory vaccines, that are banning vaccine passports. These states could possibly suffer in the future by a lot of these larger companies that are really pushing for this to simply move out of the states. And that could be damaging to some areas. According to the CDC, the federal government cannot require vaccination, but state or local governments and private employers can require vaccination under applicable state laws. So it's up to the individual state as to whether or not you have to be vaccinated to go to your place of work, to let your kid go to school. It's up to the individual state. Quote, there are some exemptions to an employer's ability to mandate vaccination, says Michelle Craig, managing attorney at Transcendent Law Group in New Orleans. While there are few in number, it is important that employers know these exceptions and know how to have an interactive conversation to determine whether these exceptions are applicable. Some states have sought to ban employer-mandated vaccination. In Texas, employers cannot refuse to hire, discharge, or discriminate against anyone who doesn't get vaccinated for COVID-19, while New Hampshire allows employers to enforce a COVID-19 vaccine mandate. All in quotes. I think we will see more employers mandating the vaccines and more local leaders encouraging them to do so, says Craig. Most states are allowing employers the latitude to enact vaccination mandates for their workplaces. It's likely that employers will continue to mandate the vaccine. Some workers are exempt from an employer's vaccine mandate, and workers who have religious beliefs that may conflict with their employer's vaccination requirement can request an exception. An employer must accept a statement about their religious beliefs and accommodate the employee, according to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission guideline. And there's a link in the description below to the most updated guideline for the EEOC, or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And this is the most up-to-date that was written after COVID-19. So this religious exemption still is in place in this document, or basically nationwide on a federal level, although states can allow companies to mandate it. So you still have this in place. Now, of course, health problems. Anyone that has a health issue is, that the vaccine may be unsafe for them to take, will not have to take it. But if you have a deep-held religious conviction that this is not for you, then you do not have to take that vaccine. And now this is not going to be easy to do. You're not just going to be able to walk into HR probably and say, hey, I got a religious objection, walk out, and it's all said and done. There's probably going to be a little more to it than that, I'm sure of that. But that option is in place, and keep that in mind. If an employer cannot accommodate the worker, the employer may allow the worker to perform their duties away from the workplace, but cannot automatically terminate the employee. For example, a reasonable accommodation would be allowing an unvaccinated employee to work at a social distance from others, to do telework, or to work remotely from home, or to get periodic tests for COVID-19. So there are multiple options here. And one of the things that we have to look at here is everything that we've seen over the last year and a half. Everything we've seen, then there is actually an opportunity for some out there. And what I mean is an opportunity, if you're in one of those states that are mandated, to keep your job. Because over the last year and a half, how many people have worked remotely? I know personally, I've worked 100% remotely, almost until just here recently before I tore my ACL. But up until that point, it was all remote. And it was just as productive, probably more productive and efficient for what I do to work remotely than it is driving into the office, sitting in there, trying to get everything done, then going back home. I was able to get a lot more done in a lot less time. And I think a lot of people sort of feel that same way. So with the pandemic we saw last year, with that pandemic, that proved without a shadow of a doubt that the majority of large companies in the U.S. can allow their employees to work remotely. They proved that by letting us do it through the first part of the pandemic, the first year. And we produced. A lot of jobs these days can be done remotely more efficiently than they can be done in a cubicle, in an office, or in an office environment. And there are a lot of other jobs that can work remotely or hybrid. So with the lockdowns we had, that actually proved our case that if you require a mandatory vaccine, then, and I take the religious exemption because it does apply to me. If I take that exemption, and my company, after having let me work from home a year and a half already, would really have no choice at this point unless they wanted a big legal battle. There's a lot we can do to fight back to a degree, but we are seeing more of this coming, and we do have to be really concerned. I just dug a lot into that today, and I wanted to share that information with everybody. Tried to keep this video short as I could, so thanks a lot for watching, everybody. God bless. And for now, Serious Survivor out.